Today we start a controversial topic: is women and learning. Dun dun dun. And I have a two disclaimers, or I guess a disclaimer and like a suggestion. The disclaimer. Sure. Okay. The disclaimer is that I am not prepared to go into like practical questions. Okay, I mean, it's not practical halachos here anyway, but like especially in this area where practical questions are like, there's a lot of curiosity, then I can't go into it. You could definitely ask them, but I'm not prepared to go into it. The second thing is it's going to be very tempting to want to go outside of the Rambam to either other shitos or to like the Gemaras. And since this is Rambam Bekius here, I want to stick to Rambam. And if we do any other Gemaras, it'll only be because they come up in the Rambam assistance that we have. But the recommendation is that Rabbi Chait gave a 3-part shiur called Women Learning Gemara, I think. And I recommend listening to those because he goes through all of the Gemaras and then goes into the practical stuff. Okay, so there are only 2 halachos on this in the Rambam, 2 new halachos. Okay. And so we'll start by reading all of it, and then we'll do the these mafarshim that we have on the Rambam and see where we go from there. Okay, so yeah, this is in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Gimel, bottom of the page. Got it? Yeah. Okay. Isha Shalamda Torah. So a woman who learns. Actually, you know what? Now I'm confused. Shalamda Torah, is that she learned, or that I think that she learned Torah.
Mine is Shalom Mida.
Yes,
Actually, I guess it's the same thing. I wonder.
Is it that you taught her Torah, or I'm very bad with conjugations of the Melamed and Lomed.
Actually, I guess I don't know. It's Lambda thing.
Yeah. Oops, this is not my browser.
Like a girl who learns Torah.
It does sound like that. Yeah, I'm just gonna check just on Chabad.org. Embarrassingly enough, the English. Not because it's Chabad, but because like I should know this English. But again, I never got my hey Mati, I never got my basic grammar. I just one. No, this is one we did yesterday.
I have a Mishneh Torah, so you use them.
Right. No. Got it. Because we need the footnote person. Okay. A woman who studies Torah is how they translate it. All right, so we'll go with that for now. We're on Halacha Yud Gimel at the bottom.
What's the Yud Gimel one?
Oh.
I only ever see that in the past.
Yeah. So basically the short story, what?
Like Sharks filling?
The what?
Like Sharks filling?
No. Unless I give you the wrong packet.
Okay. I'm just probably not.
Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Gimel. Yeah. So the Rambam divided the what we call like Halach Aleph, Halach Bet.
Yeah.
The Rambam didn't number his.
Okay.
He made paragraph divisions in his Mishneh Torah, and the paragraph divisions are to aid memory because it's easier to memorize things in chunks, but also they're conceptual. So let's say like if the Rambam included 2 things in one halacha, then presumably there's a conceptual tie. Otherwise, he would have made a new halacha. Okay. The problem is that when they printed the published versions of the Rambam, the standard ones, not these critical ones, then the editors over the generations basically just decide to make their own divisions where the Rambam didn't make them. Okay. So in this edition, what they do is they preserve the numbering system of the published edition, so you could look stuff up, but the actual paragraph divisions are from the Rambam. So let's say in this example of Yud Gimel, the Rambam divided those into 2 paragraphs. The first one started with Isha Shalom the Torah, the second one that started with Amru Chachamim. But in the printed editions, they just mash them into one halacha. Okay. Or here's another example. So in this way, this is a case where the publishers mash them together. But then look at what we've been doing the last couple of days. Look at the previous page on halacha Yud and Yud Aleph. So that was until when is a person obligated to learn Torah? Until the day of his death, as it is stated, lest you remove them from your heart all the days of your life. And anytime a person is not involved in learning, he forgets. And a person is obligated to divide his learning time into thirds, a third in Torah Shebeksav, a third Torah Shebal Peh, a third in Talmud. So the Rambam, in the actual Rambam, this is one paragraph. Okay, but in the printed editions, they said, oh, these sound different, so we're going to make one halacha 10 and the other halacha 11, and there are not necessarily, sometimes there are halachic nafkaminas, but conceptual nafkaminas, like actually we didn't talk about this last time. Why is the Rambam putting this in one paragraph? It does sound like two different halachos. So the answer is that the Rambam is not saying, see, if you read it according to 10 and 11, you would think that you're obligated to learn Torah all your life, and then you are obligated to divide your day into thirds, okay? But really, the Gemara says you are obligated to divide your life into thirds, and then the Gemara says, how do you know that? Or like, how do you know how long you're gonna live? And the answer is, oh, you should divide your day into thirds. So that's why the Rambam put it into one. So like the idea, you're missing a fundamental philosophical idea about why you do the daily triple split thing, is it's not because you are dividing your day, it's because you want to divide your whole life into thirds, and the way you do that is on the day-to-day unit. As opposed to say like Rashi has this, what Rashi Shita is on the dividing your time into thirds? The Mishneh and Pirkei Avos does that, and I think we raised the question: how does that jive with this program? Because it doesn't seem to make sense. I believe Rashi says Sunday, Monday you do Torah B'Chsav, Tuesday, Wednesday you do Torah Peh, and Thursday, Friday you do Talmud, and then what is Shabbos? You review. I don't know. Like I've never seen what Rashi says there. So it's an example of why like it's important to use the critical edition of the Rambam. Because you have the Rambam's actual like way he wanted you to learn halacha instead of the publishers arbitrarily deciding things. This is one of my rants last year, which I went on many times. Yeah, but always good to review.
The Rambam manuscript.
So there are different critical versions of the Rambam. The most authoritative one is called the Sefer Hamuga, which means the corrected version. Or another title for it is the Oxford manuscript. So this is the one where the Rambam was always updating the Mishneh Torah through his entire life, okay? And this is the one where he proofread it and signed off saying, this is my final copy. But the problem is we only have it for Sefer Hamada, the Hagdama, Sefer Hamada, and Sefer Ava, the first 3 of the 15 books, Okay. We don't have it for the rest. But then there's other critical editions. There's the Yemenite manuscripts. There's Qafih's manuscripts. There's a couple other like really old ones that are authoritative, and those we have. So like there's like a handful of them, and the good editions like like Mechon Mamre, the website that I always use, not Facebook, Mechon Mamre, is one of the critical editions of the Rambam also. So sometimes there are differences among the critical editions, but yeah. So good question. Okay. So back to our what do you call it here? So Isha Shalom the Torah, a woman who learns Torah, Yesh La Sakar, she has reward. Yay. Aval Eno Kiskar Ha'ish. Aw, but it's not like the reward of a man. Okay. Mipnei Shalom Nitztavas, because she has not been commanded. Again, we'll analyze all this. I just want to read the whole thing first, just get a bird's eye view. So she doesn't get as much reward because she's not commanded. V'chol ha'oseh davar she'eno mitzuva alav, ein schar kischar ha'mitzuva she'asa. Anyone who does something that they are not commanded in, that person's reward is not as great as a person who was commanded in it. Elapachos mimenu, but it's less than that. The afapi sheyesh la sachar, even though she has reward, tzivu chachamim, the sages commanded, shelo yelamed adam es bito Torah, that a person should not teach his daughter Torah. Rov hanashim, because the majority of women, ein da'atan mechuvenes lihis lamed, their mind is not oriented to literally lihis lamed is to be taught. Okay, v'hein motzin divrei Torah ledivrei havai lefi anios da'atam, and they take words of Torah and they transform them into words of havai. Okay, which I'll explain what that is in a second. Lefi anios da'atam, due to the poverty of their minds. Okay, Amru Chachamim, last thing, and then we'll analyze each bit. Last thing is Amru Chachamim. The Chachamim said, "Kol hamalamed is bito Torah." Anyone who teaches his daughter Torah, ilu limdah tiflus. It's as if she taught her tiflus, which we're going to have to define. Okay, the Rambam gives a definition. Bamei devarim amurim. What is this talking about? Meaning, when do Chazal say that anyone who teaches their daughter Torah, it's as if he taught them tiflus? But Torah Shebal Peh. That's Torah Shebal Peh. About Torah B'Chsav, but with Torah B'Chsav, lo yilamin osa l'chatchila. He should not teach her initially. Ideally, v'im limda, but if he taught her eno kim lamda tiflus, then it's not like he taught her tiflus.
It's like against egalitarian like laning and stuff.
This doesn't have to do with laning. In fact, the Rambam, I believe. Let me hold on just one second. I'm just not going to record this because I don't know. Okay, so that is only with, oh, we read that already. Okay, so now let's go back to the beginning. Okay. We'll take it phrase by phrase. Isha shalamda Torah, a woman who learns Torah, yesh la sahar, she has reward. Aval enu kischar ha'ish, but she doesn't have reward like a man, mipnei shalom nitztava, because she is not commanded. Now, if you just stop there,
What's the reward?
oh, good, we'll get to that. If you just stop there, you would think that this is like a unique halacha about learning. But then the Rambam goes on and says, no, this is just an expression of universal, which is anyone who does something that they're not commanded in, their reward is not like the reward of someone who was commanded, but is less than it. So any mitzvah that a woman is not obligated in, or that a person is not obligated in, then you always get less reward than someone who is obligated. Yeah, Oren?
He says something very, very similar in Hilchos.
Yeah.
Near the end, where he says, I don't know if he doesn't talk about rewards much, but he says that anyone can do anything, even if they're not obligated in it, and you shouldn't stop them. Even if
Right.
they're not obligated.
Yeah. So it is a good question with what do you call? This is a true universal, which is anyone who, this is a true universal where if you have someone who can do a mitzvah but is not obligated, they get less reward if they do it. There are cases where we say that people who are not obligated should not do it, but this would still be true if they did do it. So like the fact that the Rambam there says we don't stop them implies that there are cases where we would stop them.
No, he says in all cases.
Oh, in all cases you don't stop them. Oh, interesting. Okay, that could be, yeah. Okay, so the question is, what's the idea here? Meaning, what does it mean that they don't get the reward like a person who was commanded? And again, like I think like this is a classic question, but intuitively, if you ask people on a multiple choice test, they would say the other way, right? They would say that if you do something voluntarily, you should get more reward, Yeah. You have an answer, or you're just asking the question? Okay, so let's figure out an answer. Yeah,
I've heard this before.
Okay, yeah. It's not a new thing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, good answer, but the answer that everyone said,
Yeah.
at least, is that like, if you're obligated to do something, it's because that thing was like quote unquote meant for you. So if you're going out of your way to do something that isn't obligated for you, then you're just doing something you don't need to do.
So
which is the same reason why we have the notified laws, more or less.
okay, good question. Yeah, you want to respond to that? Yeah.
No, it's just pausing my head. If you say it's obligated for you, then I feel like you should do it. Then if you don't do it, it seems a failure, and that people seem to put more value in avoiding a failure than doing a success.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's definitely psychologically true in many cases.
Therefore, I guess if you are commanded to do it, then not doing it is a failure. I guess we can say the difference between failure and meeting minimum standards is different car. Well, I guess the person who's commanded is extra credits. And the person who's not commanded, the person who's not commanded is extra credit. Right.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, but just to respond to what you're saying is, in some cases that might be true, but in a lot of these cases, the only reason women aren't chayav is because it's a mitzvah sosesha man grama. It's a time-bound mitzvah, and women were not like burdened with that. It's not like it wasn't meant for them. I mean, it's not meant for them in the sense that they weren't commanded, but like, that's presuming that there's an idea of like it was meant for you or not meant for you, as opposed to like you don't have to do it because of a technicality.
Why is this just wondering like technicality and not like?
So there are people who do learn it as. What was that?
You saying learning Torah is a mitzvah?
No. I'm just using it as an example. But what did you just ask?
Why is
a technicality? Yeah. So there are people who hold that it's not, but I'm calling it a technicality in the sense that it is. Okay, I guess maybe technicality is the wrong word. What I meant is it's not like specific mitzvos are assigned to you based on whether they're meant for you. This is like categorical. Like anything that's time bound is women and servants are exempt from. So it's not. Now you could say that entire category is assigned for that reason. Yeah, I guess because of the way that I understand the sugya, which comes from a different shiur, then there's a separate reason why they're not obligated in that, which maybe we could talk about some other time. It's a shiur from the Kuntras, yeah?
So maybe I can put it in terms of like a metaphor.
Sure.
It's like men have this mitzvah to fulfill.
Yeah.
Let's say they're in a river, they're like rolling upstream.
Yeah.
And like that they're rowing and like toiling to get the other end of the river is they're learning.
Yeah.
Like the women are like the side of the river and they could just walk there. They don't have that difficulty, but they choose to
Ah.
in a boat anyways. But they don't really need to. They can just walk.
Okay. So that actually is the answer that I've heard, and that's the answer that we're going to see. And Qafih summarizes it here. And I don't know. I want to say that there's a Rashi who says this also, but I like the way Qafih puts it. So he says like this. You don't have this in your packet. Sorry, I didn't print out just for this one page or this 2 pages. He says Vata'am nira. So the reason seems pashut, is obvious. D'hamatzuva yish biyado shtaim. Someone who's commanded. I'm just going to use the word obligated because I feel like that's that's how we would phrase it in English. Someone who's obligated has in his hand 2 things. Etzem halamida, the learning itself, shehi mitzvah, which is a mitzvah, the kiyum hatzivui, and then the fulfillment of the command. Uveyeser hamitzvos, etzem ha'asiya, hashra'as asiyasa, nimsa ha'ose. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Actually, he takes this in a different direction. Sorry. So did Makbili say it? No. So I'll tell you what this is what I okay. I'm going to say what you said, Mati, but in the way that I remember. I believe it's Rashi who says it, but maybe it's not Rashi. Basically, like this: what's the true reward for mitzvos? Okay, Olam Haba is the true reward for after you die, right? But like in this world, what would the true reward for mitzvos be?
Rain. Is one of them.
Did you say rain?
Yeah.
Oh, so rain is actually not.
What?
Rain is is the brachos.
Is the journey their reward?
Well, what do you mean by the journey?
Learning Torah.
Yeah. So the essential reward for mitzvos is the perfection that you get from them, whether it's intellectual perfection, perfection of midos, perfection of society. Okay, which does affect your Olam Haba, but I'm talking about in this world. Brachos, the rain you get to facilitate your involvement in mitzvos. It's not a reward. It's a like a scholarship.
So how do you get it though?
How do you get the rain?
Yeah.
No, you do get the rain. The more you're in line with the mitzvos, then yeah. You know, maybe we should read the Rambam on that in a second. Okay, just take it as a premise just for now, and then we'll see the Rambam inside. So the real reward you get is the perfection from the mitzvah. So in the case of learning, the real reward is the actual knowledge that you get. Okay, so for that, women and men are exactly the same. If a woman, learns Torah, she gets the reward of the knowledge just like the man does because she's a Tzelem Elokim, just like a man. Okay. Same thing. Another example is in other mitzvahs. Let's say Kriya Shema. Women are not obligated in Kriya Shema because it's a mitzvah to say Shema Grama. What is the most important aspect of Kriya Shema? Yichud Hashem, right? God's oneness. So you're going to tell me that like a woman has no perfection from reading Shema? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Of course she has perfection. Okay. However, there's a separate reward, which is the reward you get from overcoming your psychological resistance to doing what you're commanded. And that's what you're using in your boat mashal, right? So like if you are obligated, you also have to contend with the overcoming the resistance to fulfilling the obligation and all the psychological burden that comes along with that. Whereas if it's purely voluntary, there's not as much conflict. You either take it or leave it. So by definition, you can't get that if you're not obligated in it. And that's what the woman is lacking. So what it turns out is like, let's say you have like any mitzvah, like let's say like sleeping in the sukkah. Okay, is my favorite example of a mitzvah that has conflict. Okay, because I don't like sleeping in the sukkah. So there's 2 rewards I get for sleeping in the sukkah, right? There is the reward of all the perfection I get of Laman Yidu Dorsechem B'Kibbutz Shavti, and like being outside of the house and being in nature, and like the frailty of man, and like all that other stuff. And if a woman did the mitzvah, she would get exactly the same reward. But then there's the fact that when I have been, sleeping in the sukkah for 6 nights, and like it's that 7th night, and I haven't gotten a good sleep, and like I have to drag myself out there into the cold, and I have to do that. That there's a certain perfection in submitting yourself to the will of God that is like a king's commandment. That for her, she could take it or leave it. Now there's only one way she could kind of get that reward. How could she like simulate that reward? Make a netter, right? So she couldn't take the mitzvah upon herself, but how is that lacking? That's also true. It's a different mitzvah, right? Technically speaking, it's a netter. So there's the forcing yourself to fulfill your netter, and then there's the mitzvah of sukkah. But also, what could she do theoretically if she just made a netter? she could have avoided, right? Or there's the psychological fact that it came from her, that she could take it or leave it, in that sense, yeah. So this is, I think, one of the biggest misunderstandings, especially when it comes to learning Torah, is that I've seen people make comments. Again, having taught girls at a girls' high school for 10 years, I've heard of people who have been told comments that a woman's learning is worth less than a man's learning. Not true. The only difference, there's two differences. One difference is that women, actually, you could argue this is just one difference. Men are forced to learn. You have to learn no matter what. Women are not forced to learn for this reason. So the perfection that you gain from doing something that you're commanded to is not something that women have access to. And then the other thing is men have a obligation to pass on the formal Masorah and women don't, which is not as relevant now, because in the time when Torah Shabbat was only passed down if you taught it, then that's a real burden. Now, let's say you just decide to not learn your whole life, so you're not fulfilling your mitzvah, but the Torah survives, not as a result of your negligence. Yeah. Okay, so that's women and reward for learning and for other mitzvahs. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. Next line. The alpha pi sheyesh la sachar, even though she has reward, tzivu chachamim shelo yilamed adam es bito Torah. Then chachamim commanded that a person should not teach his daughter Torah. Now, before we even read why, okay, what nuances are there in that formulation there? Because you'll hear people say oh, women aren't allowed to learn Torah, and that's wrong for many reasons.
Yeah.
But
to not teach your daughter.
Okay, so first of all, it's to not teach. Okay, that's number one. Nowhere does it say about learning, and secondly, it's your daughter. Okay, it doesn't say that sivucham shelo yilamed adam nashim Torah. It doesn't say that that a person shouldn't teach women Torah. Okay, it's specifically your daughter. And third, it's sivu chachamim, is the sages commanded. Now, what does sivu chachamim mean? So this is what Rav Makbili says on the left, first footnote, Yud Gimel 1. Sivu chachamim, I think nechaya, that's a modern Hebrew word. The premise shel chachamim, not actually, I don't know what that modern Hebrew term means. You got the green one? Yeah, the green dictionary. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Nechia. It's definitely a modern Hebrew word. Nechia. Okay, so nechia is not there. What about hanchaya? Maybe that's what the word is. Hanchaya, direction or guidance. Okay. Hanchaya shel chachamim, the guidance of chachamim, mipnei hanisayon shel rov hanashim, based on the experience or the statistical facts of the majority of women, v'lo kulan, but not all of them. Oh, that's another thing, by the way, is there are those who say that the Rambam was misogynist, and you could make that argument. But one thing he's definitely not holding here is he's definitely not holding that women are intrinsically incapable of learning Torah, because he says the majority of women. Okay, and we'll explain that in a second. But he says iser. However, there is no iser even in teaching a woman Torah here. Okay, why? How do we know this? Mishneh Torah. The phrase tzivu chachamim in the entire Mishneh Torah means that this is what the chachamim urged you to do, but it doesn't mean that there's a prohibition to do the opposite. V'ha'isr hu b'hachvanasa lilmod, aval lo k'shehizma ba'a mimena. The prohibition is in, this is another modern Hebrew word, hachvanasa, or at least that's a modern form. Yeah, it's definitely related to kavana. Yeah. Hachvan, I've never heard of hachvana. Kavana, yes. I think it means the isser is for maybe to intend to teach. When you initiative, maybe the initiative comes from you. Aval lo k'shehizma ba'a mimena, but not when the initiative comes from her. Meaning if she wants to learn, then you can teach her. Then he says, Bismanam hanashim lo lamdu b'misgaros mosados. Back in those days, women did not learn in like institutions, like in like schools, right? Yeah. Okay. So he's qualifying this a whole lot. All right. But he doesn't talk about the daughter thing. Okay. So question is, so let's finish reading the sentence and then we'll try to figure out what all this means. Mipnei. So the reason the Rambam is mipnei. Sharov hanashim, that the majority of women in da'atan mechuvenes lihislamin. Their da'as is not oriented to be taught. Now, we said yesterday that the word, or 2 days ago, that the word da'as in the Rambam sometimes means mind, like intellect, and sometimes means psyche. Okay, and we gave examples where it means psyche, where like the Rambam says, if you tear paper on Shabbos to destroy it, then that's not a malacha. But if you tear it in order to miyashiv your das, to settle your mind, like you're like getting out anger, then that is mutter. So their das means psyche. So the question here is, when the Rambam says that their das is not mechuvenes, does he mean that psychologically, then they don't have the proper psyche to learn, or does he mean like intellectually? So we'll have to figure that out from this next line. They take words of Torah and they make them into words of havai, lefi anius datan, according to their the poverty of their das. So Rav Makbili says havai is hevel ushtus, like vanity and foolishness. Okay, but I want to argue that that's not what the Rambam means by havai, and I'll show you. If you go to Sefer Hafla'a, which is about Nadarim and Shavuos, I think it's in Nadarim. Let's see, Havai. Yeah. So, oh, sorry. No, he starts off in Shavuos. Have you ever heard of Havai? Like the word Havai? It's a weird word. Not Halavai. Yeah, Halavai is a compound word, I think. No, I don't know. It's a different word though. So he says, let's see. Okay, Shavuos shel Havai. So what is an oath of Havai? So we're gonna read this and then you infer from here what Havai means. Okay, Kagon shera chayalos gedolim v'choma gvo. Let's say you see huge armies and I didn't put this on the screen. Have I not been sharing the whole time, or did I just not share now? Okay, good. All right. So he says, let's say you see huge armies and a tall wall, v'nishba, and you take an oath, sheraisi chayo ploni hamelach v'him kiyotze mitzrayim. You say, you take an oath, you say, you swear you saw the army of, you saw the army of this king, and they were as numerous as the people went out of Egypt. Okay, v'sheraisi chomas ha'ir plonis, and I saw the wall of such and such a city, gvoha ad larakia. You swear it went up to the sky. V'kiyotze b'dvarim elo. Okay, so that's an example of Havai.
Oh, it's like hyperbole.
Hyperbole, exactly, right? So I think, and it's clear that that's what Havai means here. Okay, and I'm trying to think where else the Rambam says Havai. Maybe it's the Rambam's son who says Havai. Just give me 1 second.
We also find something else in the Dharam, accidentally.
Yeah.
Remember when we went to the Dharam?
Oh yeah. Well, there he just said it's the same as Shavuos of Havai.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at the Rambam, Avram and Rambam, oopsies, we did this last year. Drashos. And Havai. Oh, so this is one of the Avram ben Rambam's drashos for one of his categories of midrashim. Okay, so he calls them midrashim of Havai. Okay, he says Chelek HaChamishi is drashos dibru behem lashon Havai. So he gives an example. It says in the Gemara Pesachim, Amar Mar Zutra Atel al Atel who tone arba me'e gemali. So he says that like this guy had 400 camel loads of something. Okay, I forgot what the substance was. Darsh Atzel Harishon who rosh pasuk. Okay, then he quotes the example. Hold on, what's the line I'm looking for? Yes, lashon Havai. Mikra kulo mesha arba ameos. Yeah. Oh, so he quotes this Gemara. He says, But he says, oh, here we go. Oh, these are stories that are stories of Havai. Oh, so here's the phrase I was looking for. He quotes a Gemara in Talmud that says, Dibra Torah balashon Havai, the Torah speaks in what we're saying hyperbole. Okay, Dibru Nevi'im b'lashon havai, Dibru Chachamim b'lashon havai. So the Torah speaks with hyperbole, Nevi'im speak with hyperbole, and Chachamim speak with the hyperbole. And it gives examples. Dibru Torah b'lashon havai. The Torah speaks with havai because it says in when Klal Yisrael went into Canaan, it says Arim Gedolos Ubetzuros Bashamayim, cities that were huge and fortified up to the sky. So that's havai. Dibru Nevi'im b'lashon havai. V'tivka haaretz l'kolam, that it says that the earth cracked because of their voice, and that's not describing a miracle. That's just saying like they had a really loud voice. Dibru chachamim b'lashon havai tapuach v'gefen uparoches. I don't know what that's referring to. My point is that the way that the Rambam and Avram ben Rambam use the word havai does not sound like any kind of foolishness. It sounds like hyperbole or exaggeration. Okay, so now the question is like this: when the Rambam says we don't, context is he says. The Chachamim commanded to not teach his daughter Torah, that a person shouldn't teach his daughter Torah, because the majority of women, their das is not oriented to learn. And das, we said, either means psyche or intellect. And he says, and they will take words of Torah and make them into words of hyperbole based on the poverty of their das. So the question is, first of all, what is the concern here? What does it mean that they'll take words of Torah and make them into words of hyperbole? Like, what would be an example of that? And the second question is this a psychological problem, or is this an intellectual problem?
I think of like the way that a lot of times like you see like Christians do.
Yeah.
They'll just like quote a random verse
Right.
in the Bible.
Yeah.
Completely out of context as a way to somehow like bring like psychological composure to whatever's happening.
That's interesting. Right.
Something like that.
Yeah. So that's definitely a possibility. And there, if that's what he means, I would say that havai means basically taking something that really has a context and a definition and just expanding it way beyond like what it should be. That's definitely a possibility.
But how could that be a problem? Because isn't that because isn't that like not what Gemara?
Well, yeah, but the Gemara is doing it first of all with chachma, you know. And it's a style of drasha, you know. It's not like they're just Gemara's just like wildly applying it.
My obvious style of drasha, we're saying havai is hyperbole.
Yeah.
I guess expand things off of that. It was just that. If it was just expanding off of something beyond the only way you read, then then that would also play into all Gemara learning. So I assume it has to have like a different meaning then.
Well, what do you mean it would apply to all Gemara learning?
The Gemara, takes a pasuk and does drashim from it.
Yeah.
Higher definition of havai. Isn't that also havai or no?
So Qafih says something like that. Let's read what Qafih says and then see if that helps clarify it. So where does he say it though? He says in Nun Hey. Where did Nun Hey go? Sorry, this is not in your sheet.
Yeah.
Okay, so he says like this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to find out where it starts. Oh, no, is this on Tiflus or is this on Havai? And here's Datan. No, this is on. Okay, where does it begin? Oh, here we go. So he says, Rabbeinu Mefarish Tiflus Belomdim Asma Divrei Torah L'Divrei Havai Lefika Pirshu Lanu Rabbeinu Ki Torah Shbal Peh Amor Khan. No. He says it below. Oh, you know what? Hold on a second. He does say what you say, but I think what we have to do is we have to read the we have to read it in context with the second thing. Okay, with that second paragraph. So keeping our questions, let's just reread the second paragraph again. So anyone who teaches his daughter Torah, again, this is just daughter and just teaching. It's as if he taught her tiflus. Now look at the Rambam in this פירוש המשניות here on Mati, if you want to grab one, you can. I'll put it on the screen though, but in Sota, okay, so Sota Perek Gimel Mishnah Gimel, it's in there, yeah. It's going to be on page Kuf Ayin Gimel, but in it's faster if you hand me yours and I'll open it and pass it. Yeah, sure. Subos. Yeah. Oh yeah. So in the first half, Muddy, it's on Kuf Ayin Gimel. It is. Yeah. Okay. So whoever wants this, Yosef, you want this or? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not going to read this whole Mishnah, but the Mishnah at the top of the page brings down a machlokas tanaim, okay, which says mikan. So it's okay. It's a weird. Rabbi Che takes this up in his shiur on women learning Torah, but it says that learning Torah for the woman is good because it'll give her zuchus. So if she's accused and convicted of being a sota, then she'll get a couple more years before her belly explodes. It's the weirdest source, for why women should learn Torah. But he says mikan from here, Amar ben Azai chayav adam lelamed es bito Torah. So ben Azai holds that a person is obligated to teach his daughter Torah. So he's the one who says this. Sh'im tishte teda shezchus tolala. That because if she drinks the sota waters, then she should know that the zechus will suspend her punishment. Rabbi Eliezer Omer hamlamed es bito Torah melamda tiflus. So Rabbi Eliezer holds that someone who teaches his daughter Torah, it's as if he taught her tiflus. So now Rambam, look at the Rambam on the bottom right for the second Dibur HaMaschil, Yesh La Zechus. It's the fourth line down on the right column. Yesh La Zechus. So what does it mean she has merit for learning Torah? Rotlomar Zechus Torah, meaning the merit of Torah. V'afal pisha ina mitzvah b'kach, even though she is not commanded in this. Okay, fine. So So that's just explaining that she gets the zechus for Torah, even though she's not commanded. But then he says, tiflus. The meaning of it's as if you taught her tiflus. By the way, this has nothing to do with tefillah. Okay. Yeah.
I just wonder, could it just be really cautious if you're saying that we don't want her to be told zechus and sota?
Well, Ben Azai does, right? Because that's the reason he gives. So you're saying the other shita? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't even connect it to that reasoning. So here's what he says: Inyano ki'ilu limda tiflus v'hu hashav v'divrei hahevel. So tiflus means falsehood or nothingness and matters of nonsense. The Inyan divrei Rabbi Yehoshua shehu omer ki ha'isha rotz. Oh, no, so that's all we needed for that. Okay, fine. I thought there was more. So he's saying if the Rambam says the sages say that anyone who teaches his daughter Torah, it's as if he taught her foolishness. Okay, but then b'meidavar ma'amurim b'torah shebal peh. That's only in Torah shebal peh. While Torah shebechsav lo yilamed osat l'chatchila, he shouldn't teach her initially. If im limda eno kim lamed the tiflus, then it's not like he taught her foolishness. Yeah.
What do you mean with the Torah shebal peh?
Good.
A couple of days ago, that meant halacha.
Exactly, right?
We definitely should be teaching.
Yes, exactly, right. So all of the commentators pick up on this, and they say, "Oh, Ram doesn't mean Torah shebal peh here." Okay, for example, Rav Makbili says, "But Torah shebal peh lo halachos psukos hanechutzos la, not psak halacha, which is necessary for her, v'shehi chayeves lasosen, and which she is obligated to do, kamo halachos shebesefer zeh, like the halachos in this book." And he gives a proof, by the way. Because yesterday in Hilchos Yesodei Torah Daled Yud Gimel, when he says the explanation of what is asur and mutar, he says everyone should know them, great and small, man and woman. So he clearly does not hold that the Torah shebal peh here refers to psak halacha that is necessary for her. So the question though is, what type of Torah shebal peh does it refer to then?
The third category.
So if it were Talmud, then he should say Talmud. So what's the in-between thing, she needs to know halacha to keep, but you shouldn't teach her Torah shebal peh. And if you do, it's like you're teaching her tiflus. Foolishness and vanity, foolishness. Yeah.
Like all the arguments and stuff yesterday.
Okay, so one possibility, that would be Talmud, right? So Qafih does take that route, and that leads to what Yosef was saying. What I would say here is like this, okay? What I would say is obviously a woman should learn halacha that she's obligated in, but perhaps it means the entire corpus of Torah shebal peh, meaning there are many, many mitzvos that a woman does not need to learn for the sake of keeping halacha, like Hilchos tefillin and tzitzis and bris, or stuff with Beis Mikdash, So that is one possibility, and that would fit in most squarely with both sources, because he's saying that because it is Torah shebal peh, it's psak halacha, and in Yesodei Torah he just said that that the knowledge of halacha settles the mind and settles the world, but that doesn't mean that. And he says that women, it's possible for women to know it, but it doesn't mean that women should go and master all of Torah shebal peh. That's one possibility. But now Qafih says like what you two, the direction you two are going. So let's see what he says. Again, not in your packet. He says like this, starting from, oh yeah, Aval Rabbeinu Mefarish Tiflus Belimudim Atzma. Sorry, here we go. Lafika, Pirshu Lanu Rabbeinu. So our rabbis explained to us, Ki Torshbal Peh Amor Khan, that when the Ram says Torshbal Peh here, Ein Hakvana halachos psukos. He's not talking about psak halacha. Ela etzim halamidios beyudgam midos. He's talking about the derivations from the Torah's interpretive principles. She'ein b'kochan lahavin shedin gamor tali behekesh zeh or b'gzera shava. So he theorizes, like you said in Gemara, it has all of these like limudim that sound like they're very like non-intuitive, like a gezerah shava here or like a hekesh there. And he says that they will not be able to understand that how a huge halacha could be dependent on one little derivation. Have you heard the expression of mountains hanging by a hair? So it's a phrase in the Gemara that means like when you have huge weighty areas of halacha that are dependent on like one inference, So when they see that, yavo lefakfek bahen, then they will come to doubt halacha. Like they'll say like, oh, like really? Like that's how we get the halacha? Ulhotian ledibre havai, and then they'll make Torah into like hyperbole. Kolomar yavo lachshov shein dibre havai. They will think that the Torah itself, that these halachos are hyperbole. The Einan Yodos shall call Nemar Moshe Sinai, and they won't know that everything was actually given to Moshe at Sinai. The Einan Halamidus Ella Laharos Ki Chachmas Hakasuv Hakol Nirmasbo. They won't realize that the halacha stands independently of the derivations. That the derivations are only to show like a mnemonic device or to show like how it's reflected in Torah B'Ksav. So they won't know that it's like that it's the limud is not where the halacha comes from. So for example, let's think of an example that'd be a good example of this. What would be an example of a practical halacha that is very strict that we get from a limud in Gemara? Oh, here's a good one. Okay, so with basar b'chalav, right? So it's usher to eat milk and meat together, to cook milk and meat together, and to benefit from it. Yeah, to benefit. And so we get that from the fact that it says the Isra 3 times in the Torah, So a woman, now really we know this from Torah Shebal Peh, okay, like it was told to Moshe at Sinai, but a woman might see that in the Gemara. This is what the Rambam is saying. A woman might see that in the Gemara and be like, really? Just because it says the thing 3 times? Like, oh, this is just the rabbis making it up, and like,
Maybe alternatively, you should learn that it's not only basar b'chalav, but also animal cooked in its own fat.
Right. So the thing is I would have been inclined to learn it that way, that when it says she'll take Torah and make it into divrei havai, I thought it means she'll take the halacha and blow it out of proportion. He's saying that she'll take the halacha and view it as something that was blown out of proportion, But I think both of them come down to the same mistake, is that they won't understand what the relationship is between the inferences and like the Gemara's derivations and like the actual halacha, and they won't see them as like being separate. And I think Rashi says something similar to that, which he quotes earlier. Is it Rashi? Oh, Meiri. Sorry, the Meiri says like this. He says, "Ha'Meiri pirish ratzalim or devarim tifelim shmitocha vanasa b'yeser migdareha he kone armimius mad." She'll get this cunning, okay, like a bad kind of cunning, to like v'ein sichla maspik lahavanas harauya. Her intellect will not be sufficient to have the proper understanding. V'hi savura shehisiga, but she'll think that she got it. No, this is a different meaning. She'll show off her chachma. Okay, that's different. Someone else says that they'll. Oh yeah, this is Rashi. Rashi says Shmitocha hi mavina armumius v'osa devaraha hatznea. She'll basically like learn. She'll think that she's found like loopholes in halacha because she's like learned the way that the Gemara reasons. So this is going like you said, Oren, that what you're not allowed to teach her is like how the sausage is made, like so to speak, right? Like where the halacha comes from in the Gemara. The reason why I don't like that interpretation is because that sounds like what the Rambam calls Talmud, not Torah Shebal Peh, Yeah. Okay, hold on. Just what was that?
He would say, if he meant Talmud, he would say.
Yeah, he would say Talmud. Right. Okay, hold on just 1 second. There's one more thing I wanted to read from here. So do we explain? So is this an intellectual deficiency according to the Rambam, or psychological like predisposition? What's the difference?
Yeah.
Meaning, is he saying when he says the majority of women, their mind is not oriented to learn, and then they'll take Torah and make it into different Havai because of the poverty of their mind? Does he mean intellectually they're incapable of doing this reasoning, and intellectually it'll make a mistake? Or is he saying psychologically they don't have the proper like psychological attitude, and that will make them not likely to learn and make things into exaggerations?
I think you're still dealing with like if you say the goal is like we say the ultimate goal is learning, then the inability to do so would be deficiency. Like you say psychological difference. If you don't say that, then like there's nothing to be deficient because you're not locked in the ideal.
Right, but the one possible read of the Rambam though is that like there are people who believe that, you know, especially back then, who believe that women were like intrinsically like intellectually inferior, or like women can't use abstract thinking, you know, and people, you know, so like is that what the Rambam is saying, or is he saying that just psychologically they're not, you know, they're gonna have bias that's gonna make them like do this?
Wait, just because he says rogue woman,
Yeah,
just makes it seem like he's not making it like a gender essential argument.
right, but you could.
It happens to be this way.
Right. You could. So the question though is, it could happen to be like that because of,
Or just because they weren't, you know, in school.
it could be because of either circumstances or because of like either nature or nurture. For example, you can say that like most like young kids are not mathematical geniuses, but you do get like little kids who are mathematical geniuses, you know, just for some inexplicable reason. Or you could say that, so in other words, here you could mean that constitutionally women don't have this level of das, but you get exceptions. Or you could mean that, you know, since education is not available to women, then circumstantially there are not going to be that many, you know. Yeah, like there's a one of the Rebbeim who got smicha from yeshiva, Rabbi Maruf. So he wrote this really good letter to his daughter when she got bar mitzvah, his oldest daughter, and he gave a good analogy, which is that in Chazal's time, well, okay, there's a category of people who are exempt from many mitzvos, which is cheresh, shota, v'katan, right? So katan we know is before you're, you know, bar mitzvah, you're exempt from mitzvos. Shota is like someone who has a mentally incapacitated, and the general rule is they're exempt from those mitzvos that their mental incapacity like interferes with, you know. So like someone's severely autistic, then they might be exempt from all mitzvos. But let's say you have a person who like, you know, has OCD, you know, like a severe case of OCD or whatever, and like they might be exempt from like certain mitzvos, you know. So like it's like a you know, it goes based on individual case by case basis. But then a cheresh, someone who's deaf. So why did Chazal exempt them from mitzvos? Yeah,
because deaf people back in the day were really like kind of screwed.
Yeah, why?
Because they didn't have sign language.
Right.
So if they couldn't hear anything, then they couldn't be taught anything.
Exactly. So deaf people back then, before sign language, they never developed language because there was no way to have language with them. And since the development of your intellectual capacity is so tied to language, they literally would be like imbeciles. Like they would not have the ability to think. So the thing is that for all of history until sign language, basically, people assumed that those who were born deaf were like intrinsically incapable of thinking. And then once they were taught sign language, we see like, oh, that was a mistake. It's not that they're intrinsically incapable of thinking, it's that they just never had the opportunity to develop language. And now we see that they can. And that's why I believe that I don't know if this is like unanimous, but definitely there are poskim now who hold that if you were born deaf but you learn sign language, of course you're obligated in mitzvos, you know. So Rabbi Maruf in his letter to his daughter said the same thing happened with women, is that in the ancient world and in the medieval world, then the vast majority of women just had no learning, you know. So anytime you encountered a woman and you tried to like explain something like intellectual, they wouldn't get it because they never had the opportunity to like learn, you know. But now we know that women are just as capable of men in terms of thinking, you know. And again, the Rambam held that that's the case. Like there's nothing intrinsically that prevents women from doing that, because he says a woman can master Gemara, you know, in the Torah. But he held that like if you look around at women aren't cut out for this, you know. Something similar is going on in this world now with STEM, right? With like women going into science and engineering and math, that people used to think that, oh, women don't have the intellect for the sciences or for math, but that we're now realizing that was because women never had the opportunity to learn those things. And now that women are, then women are just as capable of innovation as men in those areas, So I think a strong argument can be made that the Rambam had no, obviously Rambam maybe knew a handful of women, if any, who were capable of doing this. So he was totally justified in saying, yeah, women aren't cut out for learning. But if the Rambam were around now, maybe he would change his mind. Yeah.
We're just saying that only that wasn't your saying that there's no issur to teach your daughter, not that you're a chiyuv to teach her.
Correct. Yeah, it definitely holds that there's no chiyuv to teach her, and he seems, according to Rambam Makbili, to hold that there's no issur. And this is what we still have to figure out, which is why is this said in terms of a father to a daughter as opposed to universal for women? Because it sounds like he's saying these problems exist for women specifically, or sorry, for women in general. So why is it just formulated as not teaching your daughter Torah? That's one thing we need to find out. Another thing we need to find out is what's the distinction between Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. Another thing we need to figure out is with Torah Shebiksav, what he says you shouldn't teach her ideally, but if you do, it's not like you're teaching her foolishness. That's very weird, right? Like mimanafshach, like if it's not like teaching her foolishness, why shouldn't you teach her that? And then the fourth thing we need to figure out is in halakha l'masa, like what is the Rambam shita? For example, and again, we're not going into halakha l'masa for how we paskin, but Qafih has a nice paragraph there about what would the Rambam say about women's schools now, and I'd like to just touch on that just to see. Yeah.
I mean, he had to have held that woman could be capable because he holds it to be a navi.
Oh yes, that's right. That's another point. Right. Not only are there women neviim, but there's actually someone just made this. I saw someone make this point that he holds that Miriam, Moshe, and Aaron were the highest level human beings to ever exist. So Miriam not only was a navi, but she was actually up there at the top. Because he holds that they all got death by the neshika, by the divine kiss, and that shows the highest level. Yeah. So those are our questions for tomorrow. Okay. Yep. All right. Thanks for coming. And